We're in Matthew chapter 8. We're going to study Matthew 14. But I wanted to show you there's another time when Jesus and the disciples were in the boat, and it's verses 23 through 27. And we'll read it real quick. And when he was entered into a ship, his disciples followed him. Verse 24, and behold, there arose a great tempest in the sea, insomuch that the ship was covered with the waves, but he was asleep. So this is the story about him sleeping in the boat. And his disciples came to him and awoke him, saying, Lord, save us, we perish. So they were in the boat twice at the command of the Lord and they thought they were going to perish. So this is kind of, you want to think it's kind of ironic that they're going through this again. Verse 26, and he saith unto them, why are you fearful? And we talked about this a minute ago. O ye of little faith. So fear and doubt or lack of faith, or I think the fear is evidence of the little faith. Then he arose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. But the men marveled, saying, what manner of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him? So you think they would have learned something here because they saw that he had authority over the winds and the sea. And he was basically telling them here in verse 26 that they should have been doing this. Because why are you fearful, O you of little faith? One way or another, Jesus knew they were going to get across, and how they were going to get across was really up to their faith. And Jesus fixed the problem here. But when we go, I want to just all right, there's two stories in Matthew about them being in the boat and the sea. So we're going to jump to our main verses, Matthew chapter 14. Right before our story begins with Peter, we have the 5,000 being fed. And one of the things to really grasp out of this is that most likely when Jesus broke the bread and gave it to the disciples, and when they broke it again and gave it out, the miracle was really happening in the disciples' hands. They probably, while they were going along, either the bread was broken up in their little basket, and when they pulled it out, it never emptied, or they were pulling off that broken piece, and that broken piece never disappeared. It stayed there. And so the miracle was literally happening at their hands. And so here, this is a big miracle, and it's referred to as why they couldn't see what was going on in the sea. So our main passages, I just want to give you, all right, the heads up on what's going on here right before we get into our passages. And you'll see that it's also in Mark chapter 6 and John chapter 6. That's unique. It's in the same two chapters. But we're going to read the interesting thing. Mark and John look at it more like from the group perspective, while Matthew's really keying on Peter's perspective and really bringing out what happened to Peter, while Mark and John are really talking about the group. So we have a different story, so to speak, here of the same events. It's just a different way to look at it. If you go back up here, I'm going to get into a lot of the little details so you get a really good understanding of these scriptures. Notice that here it was evening, and the disciples said, it's time to eat. So if it was evening here, this is the same day as we have. And straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship and to go before him unto the other side, while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. But the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, it is a spirit. and they cried out for fear. But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. And he said, Come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? And when they were come into the ship, the wind ceased. Then they were in the ship. Then they that were in the ship came and worshipped him, saying, Of a truth, thou art the Son of God. So I read quickly through that story. Let's jump over here to Mark real quick. We'll read this story and I'll point out some of the differences. It starts out the same, and straightway he constrained. So Mark's bringing up this constraint. We're going to get into it in a little bit. His disciples to get into his ship and to go to the other side before unto Bethsaida. So he's telling us where we're going. While he sent away the people. So Jesus is still, here's the loaves and the fish. So Jesus is still with the people while he's already sent the disciples out into the ship. You don't get that in the Matthew portion of this. And when even was come, the ship was in the midst of the sea, and he alone on the land. He saw them toiling and rowing, for the wind was contrary unto them. So they're rowing. We don't really get that part in the other story. And about the fourth watch, which fourth watch could be between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. It's before sunrise, that time right before sunrise. Of the night he cometh unto them, walking upon the sea, and would have passed by them. But when they saw him walking upon the sea, they supposed it had been a spirit, and cried out. For they all saw him and were troubled. And immediately he talked with them, and saith unto them, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. So here we have this, be not afraid. And he went up into the ship, and the wind ceased, and they were sore amazed in themselves beyond measure, and wondered, for they considered not the miracle of the loaves, for their heart was hardened. And we could talk on this, but I want to focus on Peter. But it's interesting that the reason they didn't understand the sea and how to handle the sea was because they didn't understand the loaves, the miracle of the loaves, for their heart was hardened. So that verse or this statement is not in Matthew. But remember, Mark is looking at it from the group perspective. So the whole group missed the miracle of the loaves here. So let's jump over to John chapter 6. It's very similar to Mark's. And usually John doesn't have all the same stories that Matthew, Mark, and Luke have, but this is one of them. But it does have the 5,000 being fed. So we have the 5,000. So that's all three have the same story right before the walking on the water. So even though we don't have Peter's story in this week, we should be pretty confident that it's all the same story, just from a different point of view. So verse 15, when Jesus therefore perceived that they would come and take him by force to make him a king, he departed again into a mountain himself alone. And when even was now come, his disciples went down unto the sea and entered into a ship and went over the sea toward Capernaum. So it's a little bit different here, but that's all right because it's a different person's perspective. And it was now dark. Their word for even, obviously, just reading these different passages, was a wide area of time, probably from like 5 to 8 o'clock, just generically speaking. But it became dark. So whenever dark was, they were in the boat. So you didn't just have winds and waves, but you had the darkness also. So it was now dark, and Jesus was not come to them. And the sea arose by reason of a great wind that blew. So when they had rowed about 5 and 20 or 25, or 30 furlongs, which would be 3 to 4 miles. So they did get a little distance, but it's possible they were rowing for like 6 hours. In 6 hours, they only got 3 to 5 miles. So that's not moving very fast at all. They see Jesus walking on the sea and drawing nigh unto the ship, and they were afraid. Here they were. See, this is just like the story in Matthew 8 about them being afraid because they're in the storm. But he saith unto them, it is I, be not afraid. Then they willingly received him into the ship, and immediately the ship was at the land whither they went. So John adds this little tidbit. They were immediately. So Matthew and Mark don't have this little bit. So each one is bringing out a different perspective and actually a different miracle here, because it sounds like they were probably still 3 or 4 or 5, 6 miles from their destination. And when Jesus stepped in the boat, they were immediately there. And Mark, he's pointing out how everything just went still when he got in the boat. But that's not mainly what we're going to look at. We're going to look at what Peter was doing. But I wanted you to really think, get a good picture on what was going on here. And so we're going to dissect quite a bit of this. First word we're going to look at is constrained. And straightway, Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship. So let's look at that word. And we'll let the young man say this.
Strong's G 315, anakadzo. Anakadzo.
So if you notice on the right over here, outline of biblical usage to necessitate, which I have not really figured out a good definition for that, because Brother Garth uses it. And sometimes the word for prayer is really this, necessitated, which is interesting. That's a different Bible study. But compel, drive to, constrained by force. The idea here is that you're compelling someone. Even I wondered if he like grabbed Peter by the hand and put him in the boat and did the same with the rest of them. And some people surmise that the fishermen in the group could tell there was storm coming. And they, their natural man was saying, no, we don't go fishing when the weather looks like this. And that's just, extra biblical. But Jesus had to get them in the boat. Now, maybe they wanted to just stay with Jesus and go pray with him. That's possible. But Jesus forced them, compelled them, constrained them, forced threats. See, whether, here we go. To necessitate, compel, drive to, constrain, whether by force, threats, etc., or by persuasion. So this wasn't, hey guys, get in the boat. This was get in the boat, or so this was a strong command of Jesus to get in the boat now. He wanted them in the boat right then. And so I think Jesus is setting things up for them because they didn't learn anything the first time he was in the boat with them. And I think he wants them to learn something here. So, and they're going to go to the other side. So the other side, when we look at the Sea of Galilee here, where I had a map. It's about 20 kilometers. I think it's about 30 miles from one end to the other, about 7 miles across. That doesn't, let's go back to Wikipedia. And let's look at that. Yeah. It's roughly 13 miles long and 7 to 8 miles wide. So it's not a very big, you think sea and you're not thinking the Gulf of America, but you are thinking something that's about 13 miles long and about 7 to 8 miles wide. So if they were going across the sea, then they weren't halfway. If they were going from this end north, then they weren't even close to being halfway. But they could have left, from any shoreline trying to get over to this side, I believe. So they could have been, I think a lot of people believe they were leaving in this area and going over here. So it could have been 6 or 7 miles from this side to that side. So they were about halfway, is what most people believe. And that's what some of these words kind of lend the idea. In Mark and John say they were in the midst of the sea. So it wasn't like there's some bad theories out there that say they were along the shoreline and Jesus was walking along the shore with his feet in the water. That's people that don't believe in miracles. So they come up and with other stuff. But this idea of being in the midst of the sea, I believe if we go back and look, um, the Sea of Galilee was in some places over 100 feet deep. And so that would give us evidence that once Jesus started walking, he wasn't walking in, ankle deep water. He was walking in deep water. So I'm wanting you to get an idea of what's going on here. So verse 23, and when he had sent the multitudes away, so here he's, the 5 loaves are done. He sent the disciples away. He's still dealing with the multitude. So they're out there by themselves, just rowing away. And then he went up to the mountain to pray, and the evening was come. So darkness had begun to settle in. And so now they're out there in the winds and the waves and the darkness for sure. And they would be out there for at minimum 4 to 6 hours minimum. So but the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. So let's look at, I want you to, this word midst is mesos.
Strong's G 3319. Mesos. Mesos.
And you see the outline of biblical usage says middle, in the midst, in the midst. The way it's used a lot of times, it just means you're in among people. Behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. So you could be in the middle of them, or you're surrounded. So that's the idea of this word. So I believe what this word's trying to signify here in this verse is that they're in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. So that would be close to some of the deepest part. The eastern part was deeper than the western part, but it doesn't matter if after about 2 feet, if his feet are on top of the water, the miracle is the same because it doesn't matter how much water is under the boat as long as the boat floats. But Jesus was walking on water. One of the interesting words here is the word tossed.
Strong's G 928. Basanidzo. Basanidzo.
When you look at this word, look at one of the usage: to torture, to vex with grievous pains, to be harassed. That's the biblical usage. Here is Strong's definition: to torture, pain, toil, torment. And then they throw in toss. This is the only time this word's used as toss. Number one way is torment. So you can really, and there's other words for like toss to and fro. So there's other words that could have been used here, but a very violent word was used here in the idea of something being tormented. So if we go down here, verse Matthew 8:6, and saying, Lord, my servant lieth at home sick of the palsy, grievously tormented. And then we have Matthew 8:29, and behold, they cried out, saying, what have we to do with this? Is the demons, all right? Jesus, thou Son of God, art thou come hither to torment us before the time? So when we're thinking about what's going on here with the disciples, and now here in a moment, Jesus is going to begin to walk in the sea. But when Jesus is walking on the water, for some reason, my whole life, I always pictured him walking on a pristine lake, with a nice, beautiful reflection. But he was in the same place where the disciples were. So these waves that were tormenting the disciples, tossed with these waves, tormented with these waves, for the wind was contrary, was the same sea that Jesus was walking in. The same sea that was putting fear in the disciples, Jesus was just strolling across. So we see that here in verse 25. And in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them walking on the sea. And we're going to look at that word walking. Comes into play a little bit later. walking. We'll let you hear it.
Strong's G 4043. Peripateo. Peripateo.
And you see it's a compound word of peri with a preposition and plateo. So I have my preposition diagrams here. Y'all should be able to see that. Yep. Peri is right here, peri, around. So the circle is the idea of what peri means. And in the little lion, here's peri. Here you see the lion in the middle and the little guy running around him. And it says periton linota. That's closest a Southern boy can get to Greek. But he's running around the lion. So that is the preposition being used here. So you have about, run about, or around, and then this is the word for walk. So when you look at, well, let's go look at this real quick. It literally means to tread, to trample, crush with the feet. And its number one way it's tread is the way it's actually written. So you can think about it as that the Lord is treading upon the works of the devil here, is one way you could look at this because of the idea of tread. There's other words for walk that could have been used, but the writer didn't do that. And in English, we kind of lose the idea here when we're looking at this. It's not just he's walking on the sea, he's walking on around on the sea. And that's what this word is meaning here. He's moving across the sea on top of the winds and the waves. And think the same waves that are putting fear into the disciples, Jesus is just walking on them. He's just walking around, he's just trotting on, he's trekking on. So let's go to verse 26. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, "It is a spirit." And they cried out for fear. Interesting word here. This word isn't the same word that's used everywhere else for spirit. It says phantasma.
Strong's G 5326. Phantasma.
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 That's where we get our word phantom or specter. And it's only used twice and both times on this story, once in Mark and here in Matthew. So it's not thinking like we normally think of the Holy Spirit or a demonic spirit. It's a different word altogether. It's an apparition. So they were literally thinking it was a ghost. So literally, when we see the word Holy Ghost in the King James, that this is the Greek word that should have been used for that, and not spirit, because spirit is not the same word. It's not even in the same family. The root word is this word, which to cause to appear. So literally they thought, even some scholars think that Jesus was projecting his spirit on the water, which is pretty neat because he's going to pull Peter out of the water. So Jesus' force spirit can pull people out of water. They come up with some of the craziest things to try to do away with the miracle of walking on water. It's amazing what different commentators say. But if you don't believe in the power, and if you don't believe in faith that it can change things, then you have to come up with something else. So we are verse 27. But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. So he saw their fear, and he's telling them to be of good cheer. And Peter answered him and said, that's like there was no question here, Peter. But Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. All right, let's look at some of these words here. Well, just really one word. Bid, command. Translated this word, well, I didn't let y'all hear it.
Strong's G 2753. Keluo. Keluo.
And it's It's translated command 24 out of the 27 times. One other time, at one's command and commandment. And for some reason here in the King James, they wanted to translate it as bid. But you know, let's read it with that word in there. But straightway, right here. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, command me come unto thee on the water. So it's a command. So it's a promise. So Jesus is about to command Peter in verse 29. So verse 29, and he said, Jesus, come. So one word. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. One thing I've always wondered is how far did he walk? Did how did he get out of the boat? Did he do like a tippy toe? Did he see if it was solid or not, or did he just jump right overboard and take off? But when you look at the word here for walk, it's the same word that we saw a while ago.
Strong's G 4043. Peripateo.
Yep.
Peripateo.
And there's the peri, pateo. So it's that same idea of walking around. So it wasn't that he just got out and took a few steps. Peter got out and walked around on the water. So he was walking in the miracle. Because once again, there's other words. There's words for step, there's words for walk, but Holy Spirit chose this word so that we know that he was walking on the water. 29. So now verse 30. But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. So let's look at that word boisterous. Strong, mighty. So let's see. Strong's, boisterous, mightily, powerful. How the King James translates it. Used 27 times, 10 times as mighty, 9 times as strong, and 5 times as strong man. Boisterous once, powerful, valiant. So the idea that the power of the wind is what put fear into Peter. So he saw the power of the wind, which had nothing to do with him walking on water. Because think about it, he's already walking around on the water. I like using the walking around because that's what that word says. He's walking around on the water. And then he looked at the waves and he became afraid. So what he was seeing caused him to fear and he began to sink. He cried, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately, it's interesting. Mark is known for immediately. It's not in Matthew as much, but here, Matthew, through the Holy Spirit, points out that immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him. So you get the kind of the idea that, in my imagination here, the disciples in the boat are still rowing, but Peter and Jesus are walking on. They're walking around on the water. And so Peter made it to Jesus and was, I believe, close enough when he began to sink that Jesus was within hand's reach of him. If you ever been on a storm on the ocean, at least the ones I've been on, I haven't been on an ocean, but on lakes and rivers, when it's a heavy wind and everything's being tossed and you think it's a dark. So I don't think that Jesus would have been too far from the boat, neither too far from Peter. So they were all walking and moving around together. But we know immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him and said unto him, O thou of little faith, where therefore didst thou doubt? And there's not often, I think, if you include them, their failure in the boat of them having to wake up Jesus, and the boy with the demon in him. These are about the only three times we see failure with faith in the New Testament, or at least in the Gospels. And so that's one reason I wanted to bring this up, because there's some key elements in here. We'll finish reading the rest of this. And when they were come into the ship, the wind ceased. So when Peter and Jesus got in the boat, wonder how they got in. Did they climb in or did they just kind of jump in? Your imagination wants to have fun with that. Because I can see Peter now running with Jesus and jumping in. That would be kind of like Peter. Then they that were in the ship came and worshiped him, saying, "Oh, of a truth, thou art the Son of God." So what was going on, the wind ceasing, they've seen that once before, and they cried out something very similar at that time too. They recognized the power and authority that Jesus had. The problem is I believe Jesus wanted them to see the power and authority that they had, because the wind and the waves again were affecting them on how they were performing in the ocean, in the sea here. I keep calling it an ocean. It's actually just the sea. But I think that's when you go back up here, I'm kind of reading into the text here, but Jesus saw them out on the sea. And so either he did that through supernatural means or he could see them and through natural means. Either way, he knew where they were and what was going on. So he began to walk out to them. And when Peter, you would think just seeing Jesus gave Peter the faith to walk on the water. And so Peter is in the midst of a miracle. In the midst of a miracle. His feet were walking on top of waves that were tormenting them, and now he's walking on them. And that there's all kind of significance in that. He was above the torment that was going on. That's why I wish they would leave some of these words more like, everywhere else, because he was walking on the torment. Jesus was walking on the torment. Now Peter was walking by faith above the torment that he was just in the boat. But when he got out of the boat, he was walking on it. So that faith, he initially had it. But when he took, now the wind had nothing to do with Peter being able to walk on that water. How much wind was blowing, how big those waves, it didn't matter. Gravity should pull you down, or if you want to, buoyancy should have come in effect. He is not that buoyant. He should have sunk immediately when he stepped over into the sea, but he didn't. So the things that he was looking at, judging with them, that the command of God, the Son of God, was no longer of any effect, because he was looking at the natural world and not looking at and not thinking of the command to come, because the command was to come. And Peter just came down out of the ship and he walked around on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, you can put this to a lot of different applications: healing, finances, salvation, all kinds of different applications. When we take our, I want to say eyes, because that's what everybody talks about here. You take your eyes off of Jesus, but it's not really just taking your eyes off of Jesus. He put his eyes on something else. And that's part of the problem here. And when we go to James, I believe James talked to Peter about this. And this is why in James, I always have trouble finding it here. Where's the verse? Here it is. I always want to think it's at the bottom when it's at the beginning of the chapter. If anyone lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. Now, in context, The next verse is talking especially about wisdom. But it's more than that because this verse opens it up. But let him ask in faith, not wavering. I think there's a reason James used this referring back to Peter. For he that wavereth is like a wave of the sea driven with the wind and tossed. For let not that man think what he shall receive anything of the Lord. So this makes it broader than just context. Context would say he's just talking about wisdom, but Holy Spirit opens it up to more here. When you become like Peter, who was walking on the water, and then you begin to look at something else, you become what we call a double-minded man. You literally have two thoughts going on at the same time, and that's not how faith works. Faith has to be one thought and one thought only, because that gets into that wavering. Now you're thinking two different things, and you become, verse 8, a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. And think about how this applies to what Peter was doing. So a double-minded man, let's go back to Matthew 18. See if I can just click back one time. Yep, Matthew 14. But when he saw the wind boisterous, so right here, Peter became double-minded. He began to look at two things at the same time, and faith does not work that way. Now think about healing and think about ministering healing. The little girl we were talking about earlier, when we're ministering to her, you can't waver. That tumor has to go. No matter what kind of doctor's reports we're getting, she is healed by his stripes. We can't vary. Think about the story about Wigglesworth. They bring that lady on stage. Two ladies are holding her up. Wigglesworth goes, let her go. And they go, no, no, she's going to fall. And so Wigglesworth is set by his stripes. That lady's healed. They let her go. She falls. So he picks them back up. They're holding her again. He commands it again. Let her go. And they argue this time. No, we're not going to let her go. She's going to fall. Well, they let her go finally. She falls again. Smith is not moved by it. He is still single-minded right here. He tells him, pick her back up. And him still even getting, the harassment from the audience now. He's still single-minded. He knows by his stripes this lady's healed. And he commands it once again, let her go. And this time that tumor falls out of that lady and that lady's healed. That is the determination that we need in understanding it's single-minded. It's by his stripes we were healed. Doesn't matter if the wind is blowing. And this is, personal to me with the kidney stone. I'd fought 4 or 5 days and I kept looking at the pain as the sign that I was healed. And Krista had a revelation about that. The sign is Jesus. By his stripes, I was healed. And I asked the Lord, I'm like, Lord, I believe you've healed me. What am I missing? And he said, winds and waves. And that's why I really wanted to study this. I've been studying this ever since that took effect. And that moment when I look past the pain and I believe, I had been commanding for 4 or 5 days, having a little bit of victory. But when I looked and went, that pain has no significance in if I'm healed or not, immediately that pain was gone. The kidney stone's gone. Immediately, I felt a little tingle in my side and it was over with. But that's what the single-mindedness is. And it's not just at one time. It's Peter's having to walk on water. We walk by faith. This is where we have to walk. Peter was being, when he first got on the water, the wind was blowing then. It wasn't like it came later. When he got in the water, the wind was already blowing. When he was walking, the wind was blowing against him and Jesus. Their garments were blowing in the wind, the water splashing around them. It's when he when he took his mind off of that and had another thought. And that other thought caused him to sink. And I believe James is looking at what Peter went through right here and is describing how faith works. Faith that cannot have two things going on at the same time. And I think a lot of times Christians, I think they're correct. They're saying, I believe, I believe, I believe. But then at the same time, we're saying, but this is going on. But. This but is a pain. You can't have a but. It is by his stripes I am healed. Whatever else is going on, when I had that pain, I was commanding that pain to go, and it would go occasionally over that 4 or 5 day period. But when I saw past thinking that that pain signified if I was healed or not, that's what made the difference. And that's what makes the difference in us is when we're single-minded. There's nothing but the command. There's nothing but his word. He is faithful to uphold his word. And so when we can be just single-minded, not wavering back and forth, that's when faith is released. And I think a lot of times we don't realize that. I was kind of trying to think of a picture of how to describe this and haven't really thought of a really good one. But I was thinking, if you had a weight scale and if you just had faith, then faith is holding that. If you had the two levels, two hands, so to speak, on a level, and you just have faith, it's going to push it down. But when you put anything else on that other side, all of a sudden, it's like that faith just it falls off because that it cannot have two things going on at the same time. That's like when we talk about doctors, medicine, um, diagnosis, what your friends say, what the devil says. Sometimes it's the same too. What your family says can cause you to think and look at something other than what the answer is. And so the answer is by his stripes we were healed. And it does good to confess it, but because I'm talking from experience here, it, you can command that pain to go, but there's a moment when faith will make it all go. And then from that moment on, you're just standing because it's done. So Peter was walking on the water, kind of wrapping this up. Peter was walking in his miracle. And when he became double minded, he began to sink. And I think this is key. A lot of times we are having faith, but we also have something else. And then that's when verse 30 jumps in. But when he saw, so, but when we think, but when we hear, but when we whatever, you can't have that but with faith. So you can't have verse 30 with faith. You can't have a but with faith. It just has to be faith. By his stripes, we were healed.